Dan and Amy, well, fresh off her Pulitzer Prize, Peggy Noonan not resting on her laurels. She has a piece in the Journal yesterday. Republicans learn the limits of loyalty. That's an admonition. Republicans, learn the limits of loyalty. She writes, among other things, that Republican office holders should by now have figured out how to speak about our ever interesting president. Most have not. They think since he is a Republican and they are Republican, they must defend him in all things. They are looking at it wrong. She goes on to say he's not really a Republican. He's kind of an enigmatic, unusual historical figure who happens to head their party. But that's not her most important point. Her most important point is being loyal isn't being a lickspittle. And I like the use of lickspittle.
Lickspittle?
Yeah. Like a bootlicker.
Oh.
Like you are here. Obsequious sycophant. Yeah, like this.
Exactly.
Like, always kissing up to Marcus Brown.
Yeah, today's his birthday, but
yesterday
was his birthday.
See what I mean?
Too.
Yeah, it was old birthday week. So being loyal isn't a lickspittle. She goes on, make clear you want to work with Mr. Trump, but won't cover for him. If the president does like it and lashes out, so what? The president has a base of support. They're with him and will give him time before they detach. If they detach, they hope for big, serious changes in policy, but they're not children. They're not unaware of his faults and weaknesses. Treat them with respect by speaking to them like adults. That is such good advice, not just for Republicans on the Hill and in D.C., but it's something approximating what I've been saying about Republicans in Illinois. When you're just, my party, right or wrong, and you're unwilling to exercise some quality control internally, what ultimately happens is you tolerate bad actors, and we've tolerated a ton of bad actors in the Republican Party in this state. Mike Scott was just reporting on one, Aaron Schock under federal indictment, and Denny Hastert and George Ryan and the whole pantheon. When you tolerate bad actors and you have no quality control, you know where you end up? The super minority, which is where Republicans have been in this state for the better part of the last decade and a half. So Peggy Noonan's a very interesting piece, worth a read, and it's a perfect segue to someone who I think does get what she's saying, and he is Colorado Congressman Ken Buck, who's got a new book out entitled Drain the Swamp, How Washington Corruption is Worse Than You Think. Is that actually possible, that it could be worse than I think? Congressman Ken Buck joins us now. Congressman Buck, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So is that, just before we get to some of the contents of your book, your thesis there, is what Peggy Noonan said, does that comport with your vision?
I think as a member of Congress, yes, but I think as a member of Congress, we have a role to oversee the executive branch. It's what the Constitution set up. So while I think most or all Republicans want to work with President Trump, we have different roles in government and we have different responsibilities. So I think that ultimately what you're going to see from Congress is when the president presents things that are consistent, legislation that is consistent with our view of the world, we are going to support him. When he doesn't, we're going to try to amend it or work with him on achieving common goals.
Well, your disposition seems to be generally the same based, if nothing else, on the title of your book, Drain the Swamp. And so give us an insight into your experience there, what people would be shocked to learn in terms of how Washington actually operates.
I went to D.C. with a general feeling that Congress was broken. When you look at the results, $20 trillion of debt, $100 trillion of unfunded liabilities, it's clear that they aren't getting to the right answer. When I got there, I saw the specifics. I saw a system where if you want to be on an A committee, for example, appropriations, ways and means, energy and commerce, you have to pay $450,000 in dues to the National Republican Congressional Committee.
What?
Same thing the Democrats have on the other side. You have to pay dues.
You got to be a money raiser.
If you want to be a chairman of an A committee, you have to pay $1.2 million in dues. And that is a corrupting influence. Most members will hold receptions in D.C., invite lobbyists. Those lobbyists will then make out checks to the National Republican Congressional Committee. And that creates a relationship where those lobbyists expect something in return. And one of the art forms in D.C. is that we don't take tough votes. We don't cut programs. We don't do the things that are necessary when we have the power of the purse and oversight of the executive branch. What we do is we continue to push off down the road the difficult decisions, and we create this huge debt. And so that's why I say I think it's worse than most people think.
So, Congressman, you're on the House Judiciary Committee and the House Committee on Rules. Did you have to pay or raise any funds to have that position?
I do, and in Colorado we do it differently. We have an event. We invite private citizens that want to see us keep the majority in Congress, and I say we, the Republicans, keep the majority in Congress, and so I don't have that relationship with the lobbyists, and some other members don't. But I think most people, when they think that you have to pay a certain amount of money to sit on a certain committee, just in and of itself, find that to be offensive.
You've got a background as a federal prosecutor. For those who don't know your particular background, and I wonder, how that informs your view of the sometimes very blurry lines between what is unethical and what is illegal in the political world.
I think it does. A lot of times, as a prosecutor, you start out using a smell test and try to figure out, does this smell right? Is this something that should happen? And then obviously you look at the law and the facts and you make decisions. But I think that especially when it comes to white collar crime, kind of fraud situations, a lot of what I see in Congress, I see inherent conflicts of interest that are set up in the way the place is run.
Well, one, you mentioned in your book that 1/3 of the discretionary spending in the federal budget is actually illegal and could be cut immediately. What exactly is that?
So I use an example of the Endangered Species Act. It was passed in 1973. It had a 5-year sunset on it, and almost all federal programs have a 5-year sunset. So in 1978, it was reauthorized again with a 5-year sunset, and the sunset meaning that it would go away. It would disappear if it was not reauthorized. It has not been reauthorized since 1978. So in 1984, it is an unauthorized program. It was, and it has received appropriations since 1984. And again, the reason is people don't want to take a tough vote. They don't want to amend that statute. They don't want to get rid of that statute. So they just ignore the sunset provisions in the statute, and they keep appropriating money to that program.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I want to also on major pieces of legislation. I mean, since we've got one in particular that has been central to the last couple of months of discussion, and that's Obamacare repeal and replace, and that may be revisited next week when you guys return. You mentioned in the book how the arm twisting happens, how votes on major legislation are going to the highest bidder. What's been the experience from leadership in the House trying to get to the magic number on Obamacare replacement?
Yeah, what I saw was an initial bill was introduced. The president and the speaker agreed to 4 conservative amendments to that bill. Some conservatives got on board. A number of moderates got off of that bill. And so there are actually more moderates that are off the bill now than conservatives. And it is difficult to form a coalition in this area because if you make the bill more moderate, conservatives aren't happy. If you make the bill more conservative, moderates aren't happy. And it'll be interesting next week. I've heard the rumors. We aren't scheduled for a vote on it, but it would be a nice surprise if we got to the necessary number and we're able to vote on it.
Well, but in this instance, then, is it just genuine policy disagreements within the caucus, or are there outside influences that are driving which way this legislation is going that you suggest happens on other major pieces of legislation?
Well, I think that politics is driving policy in this instance. There are many people who believe that we have made a promise to the American people that we will have a full repeal of Obamacare. The fact is that no one piece of legislation is going to get through the United States Senate with a full repeal of Obamacare, and so we're which allow us to repeal something with 51 votes. And so we can repeal part of what existed, and then through other methods, we've got to try to fully repeal and improve the Affordable Care Act and the American health insurance system.
Yeah, I mean, some people listening may say, "Oh, come on, this is a little bit of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. How can Representative Buck be naive about politics? This is a Captain Renault routine." I'll stop the arcane references now. But what about that? This is this like naivete and grandstanding, and this is just how politics works. How do you respond to that?
Well, politics doesn't work if that's the attitude, because we have $20 trillion of debt. What I'm suggesting is that in the first 10 chapters of this book, I give very specific examples of the pay-to-play system and how we're appropriating to unauthorized agencies $500 billion. Last year, we had a $600 billion deficit in the federal budget. Meaning we spent $600 billion more than we took in, and we had record receipts last year for the federal government. So if you look at that, we don't have a major war going on, and we don't have a major recession. And having $600 billion in a good year is scary. We're going to really suffer consequences as a result of our deficit spending.
And so this is also the period of town halls, and then I assume that constituent interaction that we've seen so much of in the last week will intensify over the summer. What recommendations do you have for the ordinary citizen, the ordinary American family, to be influential in their politics, other than showing up to a town hall and screaming at you?
Well, and plenty of them have done that, and that's okay. I actually think that in America, it's healthy to have that kind of interaction. But I offer several solutions at the end of the book, and one of them is a constitutional convention of the states. In Article 5, we have two ways of amending the Constitution. One of them is the method we've used so far. The other is a convention of the states, where state legislatures petition Congress to convene a convention to address certain issues. And the two issues I think we need to address are a balanced budget amendment and term limits. We can't do that in Congress because Congress will never limit its ability to spend or limit the terms that the members can serve. But I think that the people need to do that if we're going to ever get to the right incentive structure to get the right answers in Congress.
He is Congressman Ken Buck, Republican from Colorado 4. And his book, Drain the Swamp, How Washington Corruption is Worse Than You Think. Congressman Buck, thanks for joining us. Good luck with the book.
Thank you very much.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.